When I graduated from college, I was eager to finally experience living on my own. No roommates, no family, just complete independence. I quickly found an affordable apartment downtown in an older building that had probably seen better days. The exterior bricks were faded, the paint chipped, and there were occasional drafts from the old wooden windows. But to me, these details added a comforting charm. The creaking wooden floorboards and the distant hum of city traffic felt oddly cozy, proof that I was finally in a place all my own. The first few weeks were uneventful, mostly filled with unpacking boxes and decorating my new space. However, shortly after settling in, something strange began to happen. It started quietly, subtly, easily brushed off at first. Every night, exactly at 2:34 a.m., my cell phone would ring from an unknown number. When I answered, no one ever spoke. I'd hear only faint static and slow, rhythmic breathing, quiet enough that at first I convinced myself I was imagining it. Initially, I dismissed it as a glitch, a wrong number, or someone playing a harmless prank. But the calls continued, night after night, always at precisely the same time. Soon, sleep became difficult. I'd lie awake, anxiously watching the clock tick toward 2:34, dreading the familiar buzz of my phone on my bedside table. Each call left me more disturbed than the last, and the eerie consistency felt increasingly intentional. Whoever was calling knew exactly when I'd be in bed, vulnerable and alone. Finally, after weeks of this torture, frustration overtook my fear. When the phone buzzed at 2:34 yet again, I snatched it from my nightstand, my heart already pounding in anger and exhaustion. "Who is this?" I snapped into the receiver, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "Stop calling me." Silence lingered at first. Then, slowly, an almost inaudible whisper broke through the static. The voice was distorted, muffled, as if trying to speak quietly enough to not be overheard, but the words were clear enough to send chills straight down my spine. "I see you." Every hair on my body stood up, my breath caught in my throat, panic flooding every nerve. I immediately hung up, dropping my phone onto the bed, as though it had suddenly burned me. Sitting there, frozen, my room felt colder, darker than ever before, as if the whispered voice had drained away all warmth and safety. Paranoia overcame me. I climbed shakily out of bed, heart hammering in my chest, and moved cautiously toward my apartment door. My feet felt heavy, every step creaking on those old floorboards I'd once found comforting. Reaching the entrance, I checked the locks again and again, pulling gently on the chain. Everything appeared secure, untouched. Relief washed over me momentarily. It was just a prank, I assured myself. Some twisted joke. But as I turned back toward my bedroom, something caught my eye in the pale light filtering under my apartment door from the hallway. There were footprints, fresh, muddy footprints clearly outlined against my hardwood floor, trailing slowly and deliberately from beneath the front door. My blood went ice cold. I hadn't heard a single sound all night, no footsteps or doors opening, yet there they were, undeniable, leading straight down my hallway toward my bedroom. My heart felt like it had stopped beating. Slowly, terrified of what I'd see, I followed the trail of footprints, the muddy outlines growing clearer and more defined as they neared my room. They stopped abruptly, just inches outside my bedroom door, as if someone had stood silently in that exact spot, listening, waiting. With trembling fingers, I dialed the police, whispering frantically into the phone, feeling suddenly exposed and vulnerable in a space I'd once thought safe. They arrived quickly, carefully inspecting every inch of my apartment and the hallway outside. But they found nothing. No forced entry, no muddy tracks leading from the building entrance, nothing at all. Even stranger, my neighbors insisted they'd seen and heard nothing unusual. The building manager checked the security footage, only to discover that the camera facing my hallway had mysteriously malfunctioned around 2:30 a.m. and resumed working around 3 a.m., leaving no record of what had happened. The police seemed skeptical, offering little more than vague reassurances and advice to call if anything else happens. But I couldn't stay. Not after that night. The following day, I hastily packed my belongings, staying with a friend until I found a new place. But even after I moved, the trauma of that night stayed with me. To this day, when the clock hits 2:34, I still tense involuntarily, half expecting my phone to ring again, and that distorted whisper to remind me once more that someone or something had watched me from the shadows, and I can't help but wonder who it was, how they'd gotten inside my locked apartment, and why they'd chosen me. The worst part, though, the thing that still keeps me awake at night, is knowing that whoever had left those muddy footprints behind was never found, and wherever they are, they might still be watching, quietly waiting to call me again. After graduating, I took a demanding job downtown that often had me working late into the evening. I loved the challenge and was excited to build a career, but my schedule was exhausting. Most nights, by the time I returned home, cooking was the last thing on my mind. Ordering delivery quickly became routine, a comforting ritual to wind down after a long day. My apartment was on the 4th floor of a modern building, clean and secure, or at least, it always felt that way. I'd never questioned my safety there before that night. On one particularly stressful evening, I got home later than usual, so tired my eyes burned. Hungry and irritable, I ordered from my favorite food delivery app, barely paying attention as I selected my usual meal. After placing the order, I relaxed on my couch, scrolling through my phone, lost in thought as I waited. About 40 minutes passed, and my phone buzzed with the notification, "Your food has arrived." Strange, I thought. I hadn't heard a knock. Usually the delivery driver would leave the bag at my door, snap a quick picture, and head out. But tonight, the silence was unsettling. Confused, I rose and approached my front door cautiously, opening it slowly, expecting to see my food bag sitting in the hallway. Instead, a man stood directly in front of my door, holding my food bag neatly in front of him. He wore a delivery uniform, shirt and hat, and had a polite, calm expression. But there was something off, something uncomfortable about how he stood perfectly still, as though he'd been waiting there patiently for a long time. My pulse quickened as a chill crept down my spine. I thanked him nervously, reaching out to take the bag, but he didn't move immediately, holding on to it just a moment too long, staring silently into my eyes. When he finally released it, I quickly stepped back inside, closing and locking the door instantly. A strange anxiety nagged at me as I unpacked the food. Suddenly, my phone vibrated again. A second notification from the app. Reminder, please collect your food. It was delivered at 8:15 p.m. I glanced at the clock. It was already 8:35 p.m. Confused, I checked the app more closely. It confirmed the food had arrived 20 minutes earlier than I'd received it from the man. My heart rate spiked. How was that possible? Who was the person who just handed me my food? Unnerved, I remembered the landlord had installed security cameras in the hallways and entrances. Desperate for answers, I quickly opened the security app and rewound the hallway footage back to 8:15 p.m. The recording showed exactly what I feared. At precisely 8:15 p.m., the real delivery driver had arrived, left my order neatly outside my door, took a photo, and walked away down the hall, exiting through the lobby doors. My blood ran cold as the footage continued. Moments later, another man appeared on the screen, emerging quietly from around a corner at the far end of the hallway. He was not in uniform, not even remotely associated with the delivery company. He moved cautiously toward my apartment, picked up the delivered bag of food, stepped out of view briefly, then returned wearing the uniform he'd clearly stolen. He then stood patiently in front of my door, perfectly still, as though practicing how he would appear when I opened it. Watching the stranger standing there, waiting silently, made my stomach turn violently. The video showed him glancing around the hallway, fidgeting occasionally, but always returning to the same unsettling, calm posture, eyes fixed firmly on my apartment door. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every shadow convinced me the man was still out there, watching. First thing in the morning, I called the police and showed them the footage. They assured me they'd investigate, but didn't sound hopeful about finding him. Days passed with no updates. My sense of safety was shattered. I stopped ordering delivery entirely, afraid every knock might be him returning. I began triple-checking every lock, every window, and every corner of my apartment. Even at work, I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, unable to shake the feeling that someone was following me. Weeks later, I came home to a small envelope slipped beneath my apartment door. My blood turned to ice as I cautiously opened it, already knowing it was from him. Inside was a single folded paper with a handwritten note, reading simply, "You should be more careful about opening your door." I moved out within the week, abandoning any sense of normalcy I'd fought to regain. Even now, living miles away, safely in a different city, I never order delivery. Every unexpected knock still sends a rush of fear through my chest. And no matter how much time passes, I can't stop wondering, who was that man? Why did he choose me? And what would have happened if I'd invited him inside? Last winter, I desperately needed a break from the city and its relentless stress. A group of friends and I decided on a weekend getaway in the mountains, somewhere remote and quiet. We rented a cozy cabin nestled deep in the woods, miles from civilization, surrounded by towering pines and heavy snowfall. The description online made it sound perfect, isolated, tranquil, and peaceful. We arrived in the late afternoon, just as snowflakes began to drift lazily through the air. The cabin was old but charming. Rustic furniture inside, a stone fireplace, and cozy rooms with fluffy beds. It felt like we'd stepped into a winter postcard. As we settled in, we noticed another cabin through the trees, about 100 yards away. It looked abandoned, its windows boarded, paint peeling, and a rusted padlock on the front door. I remember joking about it with my friends, calling it our own personal haunted house. We made dinner, built a roaring fire, and laughed over drinks until late into the night. But when the laughter faded and everyone drifted to their rooms, I found myself awake, staring at the ceiling. Despite the comfort of our cabin, something felt off. The silence was heavy, oppressive even. I tried to brush off the feeling as nerves or the isolation playing tricks on me, but my eyes kept returning to the window facing the cabin next door. Around 1 a.m., I got up to stretch and glanced out the window again. My heart jolted sharply. Across the snow-covered clearing, I could see the other cabin clearly through the darkness. The door, previously chained shut, was now swinging open and closed gently, as if moved by an invisible hand. I stepped closer to the window, squinting through the dark. A chill ran down my spine when I saw a dark figure standing motionless just inside the doorway, visible only as a silhouette against the cabin's gloomy interior. My breath caught as the figure suddenly moved, stepping backward slowly, fading into the pitch-black interior. Sleep became impossible. Anxiety gnawed at me, convincing me that we weren't alone out here. Hours later, in the faint light of dawn, I checked again. The door was firmly shut again, the chains back in place. Had I imagined it? By morning, I hesitantly told my friends about what I saw. They laughed, convinced I'd just scared myself silly, dismissing it as my imagination. Reluctantly, I joined their laughter, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But as the next evening approached, that sense of unease only intensified. We explored the surrounding area, hoping fresh air would clear my mind. Yet even in daylight, something about the neighboring cabin felt oppressive. Its windows stared blankly back at us, the dark interior seeming to conceal something just out of view. We asked our rental host casually about it over text, and after a long pause, they replied with just a brief, unsettling response. "Ignore it. It's been empty a long time." That night, another snowstorm swept in, heavier than before, blanketing the forest in deep white. Despite the warmth of the fireplace, I couldn't shake my growing dread. Around midnight, a heavy thud echoed through the woods, jolting everyone awake. We rushed to the living room window and peered through the heavy snow. Across the clearing, the door of the abandoned cabin was once again wide open, swaying violently in the stormy winds. Then, to our horror, we saw it. A figure hunched over, slowly stepping out from the shadows of the abandoned cabin's interior. Its movements were unnaturally stiff, as if its limbs weren't quite coordinated. Frozen in fear, we watched as the figure paused, its shadowy face slowly lifting upward to gaze directly toward our cabin. Although we couldn't see its eyes, we all felt the piercing stare. Then it raised one arm, pointing straight at us, the movement strangely mechanical, deliberate. My heart stopped in my chest. Without a word, we collectively scrambled back from the window, panic setting in. We locked the doors, pulled down the blinds, and huddled together in the living room, listening desperately for any sound outside. All night, we remained awake, hearing faint footsteps circling our cabin, accompanied occasionally by a tapping sound against the windows, like someone lightly testing the glass. By sunrise, Exhausted and terrified, we quickly packed our bags and prepared to leave. Before heading out, we glanced once more at the other cabin. The door was now closed again, the chains secure. There were no footprints in the fresh snow around our cabin or the other. No physical sign of what we'd all clearly witnessed just hours before. The drive home was silent, the mood heavy. Later, out of morbid curiosity, I researched the property online. Buried deep in local news archives, I found articles dating back nearly a decade about the previous owner, a recluse who disappeared without a trace one winter. No clues, no explanations, just an unsolved mystery that the locals whispered about but rarely discussed. Since that trip, I avoid remote places. Even in my own home, far from those mountains, I struggle to sleep at night. My dreams are filled with images of that figure stepping from the cabin's dark interior, its shadowy outline moving unnaturally, the quiet, relentless tapping sound haunting every quiet moment. Worst of all is the lingering, unanswered question. Was the figure we saw truly something human, or was it something else entirely? Something drawn to the isolation, waiting endlessly for someone new to arrive?